This is the most dangerous moment of Donald Trump's political life, and he knows it. He is panicking, visibly, recklessly, and he is lashing out by dragging the United States into another catastrophic Middle East war without congressional authorization, without a defined objective, and without even attempting to explain what the endgame is. This isn't strategy. This is a desperate man betting American lives on magical thinking. And here's the political nightmare unfolding in real time. The loudest voices condemning him right now are not Democrats playing politics. They are combat veterans, members of Congress who actually went to war, who carried rifles into firefights, who watched friends come home in flag-draped coffins. Trump promised to end endless wars. He ran on America first. Now he is canceling an address to the nation and sprinting to a Mar-a-Lago fundraiser while launching large-scale military strikes that could ignite regional chaos. You cannot script this level of grotesque hypocrisy. When he casually shrugs and says casualties often happen in war, that is not toughness. That is indifference. That is a draft-dodging elite gambling with working-class blood. The walls are tightening. The veterans are speaking. The Constitution is being ignored. And what's coming next may expose just how disastrous this gamble really is. Let's talk about the lie. Because Donald Trump didn't just stumble into this. He campaigned relentlessly on ending forever wars. He mocked other presidents for dragging America into catastrophic Middle East conflicts. He promised strength, restraint, America first. He promised he would not send working-class kids to die in endless regime change disasters. That was the sales pitch. Now let's look at what he's actually doing. He is launching large-scale military operations against Iran. No congressional authorization, no war powers vote, no clearly articulated objective, no explanation of what victory even means. And when he finally addresses it, he shrugs. He says casualties often happen in war, as if that's just a footnote, as if that's not somebody's son, somebody's daughter. Let me show you what the veterans in Congress are saying, because this is where the receipts start stacking up. Congressman Jason Crow, Army Ranger, 3 combat tours. He says Trump is plunging us into another war in the Middle East. A war of choice, no clear endgame, no authorization from Congress, and he calls out the 5-time draft dodger pounding the war drums while working-class families pay the price. That's not partisan spin. That's a man who went to war calling out a man who avoided it. Congressman Pat Ryan, 2 combat tours in Iraq, says he has seen what happens when a lying chicken hawk president beats the war drums. He reminds us why the War Powers Act exists in the first place, so that before a president sends troops into harm's way, he makes the case to the American people. Trump hasn't done that. He hasn't explained the goals. He hasn't explained the cost. He hasn't explained what happens when airstrikes don't end neatly. And here's the gaslighting. While veterans are demanding accountability, Trump cancels an address to the nation and instead attends a political fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago. Think about that. The country is on the brink of escalation with Iran. American troops are on bases across the region, and the president chooses a donor event. That's not leadership. That's political cowardice. And when veterans demand a war powers vote, MAGA operatives troll them online instead of answering the substance. This is the contradiction laid bare. A movement that claims to support the troops while dismissing the very people who actually wore the uniform. The rhetoric doesn't match the reality. The promises don't match the actions. And the hypocrisy is becoming impossible to hide. Now let's slow this down and actually examine what's happening, because this is where the story becomes even more disturbing. I want to walk through what these veterans are saying line by line, because this isn't emotional rhetoric. This is lived experience colliding with reckless decision-making. Let's start with Congressman Jason Crow, Army Ranger, 3 combat tours. He states plainly that Trump is plunging us into another war in the Middle East, and he calls it a war of choice. No clear endgame, no authorization from Congress, little support from the American people, a war of choice. That phrase matters, because wars of necessity are defensive. Wars of choice are elective. They are strategic gambles. And when you gamble with war, you gamble with blood. Crow says something else that should stop everyone cold. When elites in Washington bang the war drums, working-class folks pay the price. That's not theory, that's reality. The sons and daughters of billionaires are not the ones sitting in bunkers in Bahrain right now. The donor class is not strapping into helicopters. The political cabal is not flying combat sorties. Working class Americans are. Now let's look at Congressman Pat Ryan. 2 combat tours in Iraq. He says he has seen what happens when a lying chicken hawk president beats the war drums. That's not subtle language. That is a veteran drawing a straight line between past disaster and present recklessness. He reminds us why the War Powers Act exists. After Vietnam, Congress decided no president should unilaterally march the country into prolonged conflict without accountability. The law requires consultation, debate, a vote. Trump hasn't sought that. Ryan says Trump hasn't explained his goals. He hasn't told the American people what this will cost, not just in taxpayer dollars, but in flag-draped coffins. That phrase isn't political theater. That is battlefield reality. And here's where it gets even more troubling. A senior Trump administration official reportedly claimed U.S. intelligence indicated Iran might launch missile attacks either preemptively or simultaneously with American action. So the argument becomes, we struck first to avoid greater casualties. Let's examine that logic. If Iran might respond simultaneously to U.S. strikes, then striking first doesn't eliminate retaliation. It accelerates it. That's not deterrence. That's escalation. This is the kind of circular justification that has pulled this country into disastrous conflicts before. We had to act now. We couldn't wait. The threat was imminent. We've heard this language. Iraq, 2003. Inflated claims, selective intelligence, catastrophic consequences. You can almost feel the historical echo. Senator Mark Kelly, combat pilot, astronaut, frames it perfectly. He says the question is never whether American service members can complete the mission. They can. The question is whether the mission makes sense, whether it makes America safer, and what it will cost. That's the adult question. Not chest thumping, not slogans, not "make Persia great again" trolling from grotesque political operatives. Real strategic assessment. Senator Ruben Gallego adds another layer. He has seen this movie before. Iraq. The promise that we'd figure it out as we go. The assumption that airstrikes solve political complexity. He points out that after Saddam was toppled, insurgents were still firing RPGs years later. Airstrikes can start wars. They rarely end them. That's not ideology. That's lived history. And while these veterans are demanding a vote, demanding accountability, demanding clarity, Trump is telling Americans casualties often happen in war. Think about the indifference embedded in that statement. Often happens, as if war is weather, as if lives are statistical footnotes. Meanwhile, Lindsey Graham is publicly saying that if troops die, they will have died a noble death. This is the pattern. Political elites romanticizing sacrifice, veterans warning about consequences. One side is speaking in abstractions. The other side is speaking from graveside memory. And the Constitution is clear. Congress has the authority to declare war. The War Powers Resolution exists precisely to prevent unilateral escalation. Yet here we are. Escalation is happening. Troops are in danger. And the accountability mechanism is being sidelined. This is not just about Iran. This is about whether constitutional guardrails still function when ego and impulse are driving national security decisions. And that's why the veterans are furious, because they know exactly where magical thinking in war leads. Now let's zoom out, because this is not an isolated decision. This is a pattern, and patterns tell you where things are heading. This isn't just about Iran. This is about a man who is increasingly ranting and raving, making impulsive decisions, and governing by ego rather than strategy. You've seen it, the rambling speeches, the confusion, the grievance-fueled tirades, the obsession with optics over substance. And now, when faced with a complex geopolitical crisis, instead of calm deliberation, we're getting chest thumping and magical thinking. That's not strength. That's instability. And instability in foreign policy is disastrous. Remember the business record. Trump stakes, collapsed. Trump casinos, bankrupt. Trump University, fraudulent. The so-called billionaire brand is littered with failure, lawsuits, and shuttered ventures. The pattern is always the same. Overpromise, underdeliver, blame someone else when it implodes. Now scale that pattern up to nuclear brinkmanship in the Middle East. This is not a man known for disciplined planning or long-term strategy. This is a man known for impulse, spectacle, and denial. And when veterans are warning that airstrikes don't end neatly, that regime change fantasies spiral into insurgencies, that working class families carry the burden. They are speaking from scars, not theory. Politically, this is also dangerous territory for him. He ran on ending wars. He ran on staying out of foreign entanglements. His base cheered when he mocked interventionism. Now, he is risking a regional escalation that could draw in proxy forces, missile exchanges, cyber retaliation, the kind of prolonged instability that drains trillions and fractures alliances. Poll after poll over the past decade has shown Americans are exhausted by endless war. They want stability. They want economic security. They want focus on healthcare, groceries, housing, the everyday realities veterans like Jason Crow explicitly referenced. Instead, we're watching resources shift toward another open-ended confrontation with no clearly defined exit. And here's the broader warning sign. When leaders dismiss constitutional process, when they sideline Congress, avoid votes, dodge debate, that's not confidence. That's fear of accountability. Because a war powers vote forces names on record. It forces senators and representatives to go home and explain their decision in town halls and high school gymnasiums. It forces clarity. And clarity is dangerous for leaders operating on slogans. This isn't just about whether strikes were justified. It's about whether the country is sleepwalking into another protracted conflict because one man believes projecting dominance is the same thing as having a plan. History is littered with examples of leaders who believed quick strikes would resolve complex political crises. It rarely ends cleanly. It rarely ends quickly. And it often leaves generations dealing with consequences. That's why the veterans are so urgent right now. They recognize the early signals, the inflated threat framing, the preemptive logic, the casual talk of noble sacrifice, the dismissal of constitutional checks. These are not isolated missteps. They are warning signs. And when you line them up, the broken promises, the impulsive leadership style, the business history of collapse, the disregard for process, this doesn't look like strength. It looks like a system under strain. It looks like a presidency gambling big to project control. And history shows us how that kind of gamble often ends. This is the difference between slogans and service, between chest thumping and constitutional duty, between magical thinking and hard-earned experience. Veterans who have carried rifles into combat zones are telling us this is reckless. They are demanding accountability. They are asking the most basic question a democracy should require before war. What is the plan? Donald Trump promised to end endless wars. Instead, he is escalating one without a vote, without clarity, and without owning the consequences. That's not strength. That's dangerous indifference wrapped in bravado. We cannot normalize that. We cannot let war become a talking point or a fundraising backdrop. The Constitution requires debate. It requires votes. It requires transparency when American lives are on the line. This is about more than one strike. It's about whether we allow ego and impulse to override democratic guardrails. If you believe in accountability, if you believe veterans' voices matter, if you believe democracy requires oversight, hit subscribe. Help us grow this channel. Support independent media that refuses to let reckless power go unchecked, because the stakes right now are far too high for silence.